Hello, YouTube, to everyone who's either watching right now or may end up watching in the future. Like, comment, subscribe. Also, feel free to check out any of the playlists are available on my channel. Last time I did a stream, I talked about history, but there wasn't anyone else with me on camera for that stream. Different story this time. What? What?
The camera. There's
What
black
a-
stuff on it.
I don't know what you mean by black stuff.
Or is it? Oh, it's
No,
on your
it's-
screen. Never mind.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yeah, everything's good there. So to start off this stream, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yes. What's up?
What was the cause of World War One?
I don't know. I don't know what the cause of World War One is, but World War Two was because of Hitler going that it wasn't our fault for World War One. So why are you putting it on us?
Yeah, that's very true. Hitler and the Nazis took advantage of resentment that the populace had because of the Treaty of Versailles that was created by Allied nations after World War One.
Mm-hmm.
This treaty was intended to harshly punish Germany to the point where the treaty forced Germany to accept sole responsibility for World War One, which is absolutely not the case at all. The reality is there were several factors that led up to World War One, so
Yep.
it's more complicated than just there being one cause. So the Treaty of Versailles ended up backfiring pretty badly in the long term because it absolutely contributed to the rise of the Nazis. But in regards to what the cause of World War One was, well, it's easy to think that the cause was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that happened right before the war started. But in reality, the assassination was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, or to put another way, the final straw. There are several factors that, over a period of years, led up to World War One. For example, the practice of militarism. Have you ever heard that term before? It means a nation building up their military force. Several different European nations had, over the years, been building up their militaries.
Mhm.
They've been competing with each other to see
who's the better one.
Yeah, exactly. They're competing to see who could have the biggest military. Another factor was the practice of imperialism. Have you heard that term before?
Imperialism is basically one democracy where they have the higher uppers telling the basically Chinese government back in the Pang Dynasty and stuff like that. That was a hierarchy.
The Pang Dynasty? Do you remember?
I think it's the Pang Dynasty.
I was just going to say, do you remember at all about when that dynasty was in place? Okay, it sounds like that was in place a long time ago.
Oh, yeah, back in the BCs.
Yeah, that was a really long time ago since we're talking about ancient times. You basically got it right. What imperialism is a strong nation taking over a weaker nation.
Yeah.
Before World War One started, several different European nations were taking over weaker countries. Once again, they were competing with each other.
It's basically what it's doing right now in modern times is Russia trying to take back Ukraine.
That is very true. This is something that's been going on for some time now. How long?
2 to 3 months.
Yeah, that is a decent amount of time. Ukraine has been doing an admirable job of fighting back, considering that they are definitely the underdog in this situation, basically because their military is not on the same level as Russia's. It's like the classic David versus Goliath story, and that's the classic. Oh, that's a classic stronger combatant versus weaker enemy scenario. That's of course been around for a long time. In this case, Russia is Goliath. Ukraine is David. Unfortunately, the people of Ukraine have suffered a lot as a result of this.
Let's get over so Raquel can. You're still on the phone.
Hey, hey Raquel, we're actually just starting things off by talking about history. Right now, we're talking about some of the causes of World War One, but that naturally led into us talking about the current situation that's happening with Russia and Ukraine that I'm sure you've heard about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a tragic situation. There's no doubt about that, because Ukraine has suffered a good amount of harm as a result of Russia's actions. But fortunately, a lot of countries are supporting Ukraine, whether that be just them sending their thoughts and prayers over to Ukraine or them sending military aid or financial aid, whatever the case may be. But aside from militarism and imperialism, which European countries before World War One were competing with each other over, another factor is the idea of nationalism. Do you know what that is at all? Do you, Raquel?
I'm not familiar with nationalism.
It basically means pride in one's country. So it's kind of another way of saying patriotism. Now, in and of itself, pride in one's country is not a bad thing, of course. But the problem is that before World War One, there was extreme nationalism, or to put another way, extreme patriotism. And then the fourth and final major factor that led up to World War One is the fact that European countries were secretly creating alliances with other countries. The idea of that was a country saying, hey, we're going to be allies with this other country. What that means is if our ally is attacked, or basically if another country declares war on our ally, then we're going to step in to defend our ally.
Right.
We're going to declare war on whoever declared war on them. This was really important because after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, European nations were declaring war on each other left and right as a result of these secret alliances. In fact, think about it this way. If you have a row of dominoes, what happens if you topple over the first domino?
Everyone else gets knocked out.
Exactly. That's a good metaphor to understand what happened right after the assassination.
Yeah.
European nations kept declaring war on each other. It was literally the equivalent of a row of dominoes falling over. So as I was saying earlier, the assassination was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. And before the assassination actually happened, there was this thin ice of peace, basically. There was technically peace, but it was fragile, where anything could have broken that peace. And think about it this way. If you stand on thin ice, is it likely that the ice will break?
Of course.
Exactly. That is a good metaphor to understand the situation right before the assassination. I think about it this way as well. If you have a box of dynamite and you lit the fuse,
They're
what's
over
going to
here.
happen? What?
I'm talking to Raquel. They're over here.
Ah, I see. What I was saying there is that if you have a box of dynamite and you light the fuse, what's going to happen? Exactly. It explodes. That's basically what happened.
Did he?
Yeah. The box of dynamite really represents all these different factors I just talked about that were causing tensions to slowly build up over the course of years. The assassination was basically lighting the fuse that led to things exploding. And when it comes to World War II, one of the major reasons that happened was the rise of the Nazis. One of the main reasons why that happened is because European nations were very angry at Germany because of World War One. And so they drafted the Treaty of Versailles, which forced Germany to pay harsh reparations. Basically, it meant they had to pay a large sum of money. But what was the problem? But the problem was that Germany couldn't afford to pay the amount of money that they were being forced to pay. So that caused the economy to collapse. It caused money to become basically worthless, and to the point where German citizens were had these big stacks of money that were pretty much worthless.
Oh wow.
So that meant that Germany's citizens were desperate. So that played a big part in them accepting Hitler's rise to power, because a lot of people didn't have a job, or they didn't have money, and so they were desperate for any solution. And then Hitler stepped in and he talked about how he would make everything better. He would improve the economy, help Germany to get back at those countries that treated them so harshly. But moving on a bit from World War II, when it comes to the Vietnam War, the interesting thing about this war is that the U.S. and the Soviet Union were not technically fighting each other. Basically, they weren't fighting on the battlefield. You know?
They were using other pawns to do it for them.
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way. If you have a puppet master, he's the one who's pulling the strings of his puppets.
Right.
The U.S. and the Soviet Union were basically two puppet masters that were pulling the strings of their puppets. Those puppets fought each other. One of them being the forces of South Vietnamese, and then the other one being North Vietnamese. In general, the Vietnam War was part of the larger Cold War that was happening at the time, which was basically an ideological conflict between the US and the Soviet Union, because the US believed in capitalism while the Soviet Union believed in communism.
Right.
So the two big superpowers never fought each other on the battlefield. They fought each other in other ways. These would include
Baking errors, things like that.
Well, think about this. At the time, there was the space race, right? People
Yeah.
were going to the moon. Yeah, that was one of the ways.
Space race.
That's one of the ways that the U.S. and the Soviet Union were fighting each other. Really, they were
Who would be the
competing.
first one there? Who would control the moon, basically?
Yeah, this was a time where you had people like Neil Armstrong as well as Buzz Aldrin that went up to the moon. Everyone knows the classic saying of one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. That was said by one of the two.
It was done by Neil.
It was done by Neil Armstrong. That was the first time that the U.S. actually landed an astronaut on the moon. So you can imagine, right? It was a major moment.
Of course.
People were watching the TV screens intently while this happened. But aside from the space race, there's also the nuclear arms race.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, at the time, the two of them were building a lot of nuclear weapons.
Because it was mainly because the United States nuclear bombed Japan and one other country and one other town in Japan.
Yeah, that's very true. Certainly about the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yep.
Yeah, those caused, unfortunately, terrible devastation, both in terms of property damage and in terms of loss of life.
Yep.
It's not
And
even,
radiation.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not just
Like
that.
they dropped the bomb, and for hundreds of miles away from it, the kids got radiation and diseases from all of that. They got lung cancer, misformed of like colon cancer, stuff like that. Anything could have been wrong with them because of it.
That's very true. There were the people that, of course, died immediately when the bomb actually went off. Everyone has seen the image of the mushroom cloud going up into the air. A ton of people died when the bomb initially exploded, but then after that initial explosion, people either died or suffered from serious health issues because of radiation, even years after the bombs were initially dropped.
It messed up their genetics, so they can still pass it down to their kids.
Yeah, so there were long-term issues that were still being felt years after the bombs were dropped. That was why there was a lot of controversy at the time about whether these nuclear bombs should have been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki or not. As you can imagine, there was a ton of debate at the time. Some people thought that yes, this is the right thing to do. Others thought no, this is wrong and immoral. Generally speaking, the people who were in favor thought that this would help to bring a swift end to World War II. They basically thought that bringing a swift end to the war was worth the price of the terrible devastation that, of course, the nuclear bomb created.
Right.
If they wanted to end the war, they should have just bombed Germany. To be frankly honest, they should have just bombed Germany and wiped it off the map. That's just my opinion, though. That's my opinion. So take it with a grain of salt, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. That's not by any means a fact. That's just your personal opinion. And I mean, I can see an argument for that for sure. Most of the people who opposed dropping the nuclear bombs thought that the price that needed to be paid in terms of how much property damage and loss of life would ensue is not worth bringing a swift end to the war.
Right.
Most people know about Robert Oppenheimer, the guy who infamously said, "I am now death, the destroyer of worlds." Basically everyone has.
He was the one who created the bomb.
Yeah, and he said the iconic line that pretty much everyone anyway has either seen or heard of somewhere. But switching topics slightly, when it comes to certain political issues, I am opposed to abortion because I believe that life starts at conception and therefore abortion is murder. Now, I'm quickly going to address a few hard questions that naturally arise when you talk about this issue. When it comes to rape and incest, I believe that rather than depriving an unborn child of their life, a better solution is to find foster parents.
Yes, but the foster system is so overcrowded nowadays because of families who can't even take care of it. And another thing is incest, the child will be A, disformed, B, has genetic problems, or C, will just be made fun of because of the
I get
developmental problems.
Yeah, that's
incest. That's basically what all of London did back when it was the hierarchies. If you had a name and status, it was you would marry your cousin to keep that status in line. They became more stupid, and they would look like basically retards. No offense, but they would look and act way different than what they should have if they married what they wanted instead of keeping it in the family.
That is true, that back during those times, basically during medieval England, during that general time period, things were different. There were customs that were practiced back then that seem so ridiculous nowadays. But in general, as you can imagine, the world was very different back then. But the fact is, the world has moved on from those times. The world has definitely moved on from those customs. Now, obviously, those two situations are really, really bad. No one's going to disagree with that. Those are just terrible situations to happen. But there are just many different solutions out there, like adoption or a foster system or other ones as well. I don't necessarily remember other ones off the top of my head, but there's a lot of things you can do rather than just depriving an unborn child of potentially a great life.
Yes, but one other thing is, what happens if it kills the mother to give birth to this child?
Well, and that,
Yeah, I have to agree with that.
and that, well, in that case, or that would in that case, that would it would
you
not be.
still say keep the child's life, or would, because you would keep the child's life, but you would be killing off the mother, so the kid would never know its mother, right?
That would be a really bad situation for sure. It would not be an easy anyway decision for anyone to make because no parents would ever want to be in that situation. But still, even in that case, I mean I think
And
the
then
best
what about-
solution is. Hold on, just let me finish. In that case, I still think the best solution would be to find some parents out there for the child.
Yeah, there
rather
are plenty of people that want children.
That's very true. There's just a lot of things you can do. There are a lot of resources out there to help out either a mom or a dad if unfortunately that type of situation comes up. Even if you have a case of a girl getting pregnant young and she doesn't feel like she's ready to be a mother, especially if we're talking about a woman getting pregnant and she's a teenager. That would not be an ideal situation, you know. If that happened, I can imagine that she would probably feel like I am not ready to be a parent yet, practically speaking. But even in that case, there are a ton of resources out there to help those ladies that are in those tough situations.
Yes, but there's one other thing too. It's the woman's choice. It's her body. I'm not trying to be mean, but why does the government need to come in and say, you're not allowed to do this? I don't care if it's your body. They're trying to control us.
Obviously, you believe that it's a woman's body, so it's her choice. But as I was saying just a couple minutes ago, I don't intend on repeating myself. I fundamentally believe that because life starts at conception, the abortion is murder. Now, in terms of what laws should be put into place, in terms of what should the government do, that's admittedly a question that you definitely could anyway get into a long conversation about. I don't intend on getting into that long conversation right now because that would get way too complicated. But there's definitely a lot you could talk about there. But when it comes to gun control, I in general believe in individual liberty, or basically people's right to bear firearms rather than government regulation. I think that even when you put regulations in place to try to
there's still loopholes. There's always going to be a loophole or something. Nowadays, they're 3D printing them. They're 3D printing the parts, so you can't even have the serial code.
Yep.
You can't have anything on it.
Yep, they're called ghost guns.
Interesting. I was not aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
I knew there were loopholes for sure, but I was not aware of that specifically.
The 3D printing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm not for people being able to bear arms just because the death toll across the country has gone up so much because people are getting guns, they don't know how to use the guns, or there have been a lot of accidental deaths because people can bear arms now. It's just, I don't agree with it.
Well, I say it's the people's fault. It's the parents' fault for not watching their kids, or
there are stray bullets though.
What if there are stray bullets? Yes, but it's not it's not our fault. The correct people who are using the guns correctly, it's not our fault. Why should we get the things taken away that is someone else's fault?
Well,
Because they can't get it under control.
yeah, actually, what I was going to say here is that even when you put heavy regulations in place to try to prevent gun deaths, which obviously everyone wants to minimize, minimize mass shootings or other terrible incidents like that happen because of guns. Everyone agrees on that, but I think that when you put heavy regulations in place, in practice, they're not that effective. Which actually ties right back to what was just said 2 minutes ago about there being loopholes.
Mm-hmm.
That's
That's
exactly
also with
why.
the same thing with the what is it called? Prohibition, trying to get rid of alcohol.
Yeah, that did not work because back during the 1920s, was it?
I think
was
so.
in-
Yeah.
In the 1900s, there was the prohibition movement because of mass concern about people getting drunk and doing terrible things.
No, it wasn't doing terrible things. It was getting them drunk and dying.
Yeah.
And doing
Yeah,
terrible things. But
that's what I was basically saying. That at the time there was a lot of concern about the negative impact of alcoholic beverages. That's why there was the prohibition movement that led to the passing of prohibition laws that made it illegal to possess, sell, distribute alcoholic beverages. But did prohibition work?
no, it didn't, because
Yeah.
you still had people, the moonshiners,
Yep.
you still had all that like it's doing now. You still have the ghost guns coming up. You still have
Yeah, were you going to continue there?
no. I was just saying you still have the ghost guns coming up. You still have people who are buying regular guns and going, "Here you go, son. I trust you, but I really shouldn't trust you because I don't know what you're capable of doing."
Yeah, that is true. Back then, you had what were called speakeasies, which were these secret places where people would go to drink alcohol. They would like go to a phone booth, for example, and maybe put in some secret password, or go to some public bar, speak to the right person, say the password,
Mm-hmm.
and then the person would let them into the back to get alcohol. The government did try to prevent this. They did take action to try to stop prohibition from being completely and utterly ignored, but unfortunately, this ended up being not very successful. The 1900s is a pretty interesting time in general. I mean, you had the Roaring Twenties and then the Great Depression,
Mhm.
two very different times. Because during the Roaring Twenties, there was economic prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, this was where you started to see cars being used en masse. Even before the Roaring Twenties, I think there may have been a couple.
There were about 1% of cars being processed at that time because only the upper class could get all of it. The lower class could not get that. The lower class had the radios and they'd have the bikes. That's how they got to work.
Yeah, that's very true. So before cars were made in factories using an assembly line process, someone like Henry T. Ford was very important for automobiles. Before then, yeah, there were cars around. I mean, they existed, but only a very small percentage of the population actually used cars.
Right.
But during the Roaring Twenties, not only were a lot more cars made, but this is where you started to see highways as well. I mean, before then, you didn't have a huge amount of roads all across the country, as you of
They'd
course
still be
do
using
now.
carriages and buggies.
Yeah, that is very true.
If you had a horse, you were considered very good off for what you had, and you'd take that horse into town. You'd get your supplies. You'd go to work with it, and then you'd come home. But if you weren't good off, you'd have to walk everywhere, you'd have to scrounge for money, everything like that.
Yeah, that is very true. And then the Great Depression happened, and unfortunately, the economy took the biggest downturn in our nation's history.
Well, we're technically going through another Great Depression because of the economy going, or not the economy, the inflation. Thank you. The inflation of everything going up, and now the consumers, us, don't have the money to make it that well in what we need.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's true.
That is actually very true. That prices have gone up a good amount recently, especially when it comes to gas. That's gotten a lot more expensive.
That's because of the war on Russia or on Ukraine. Because we used to get most of our gas stuff overseas. We'd get it from Russia. We'd get it from Iran. There's also a big, huge thing against China. We're not allowed to get things from China anymore.
What? The diamond art came from China.
Yeah, but that was before all this. Before the Ukraine, before that, it was let me think. It was right after Trump left the office, and he said no more sales from China. They're not good. They're trying to bring communists over here. Is it communist or is it? What's the other C word?
Communism?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's communism. They're trying to bring it over here and make us basically like Chinese government. You don't have a choice in what you go to. You do your test scores and you do so much work, and whatever your test scores say, that's what you become.
Yeah, that's what a lot of authoritarian, or to put it another way, totalitarian governments do. Because think about it, what's fundamentally the difference between a democracy versus a authoritarian, fascist, totalitarian government, however you want to phrase it exactly? What do you think is the fundamental difference between the two?
We have choices. We get to go, I don't want to be a janitor, even though my test says I can be a janitor. I want to pursue being an artist or a art critic or something like that. But in China, they go, well, your test scores say you are very low. You're going to be a janitor. No ifs, ands, or buts. You get this set amount of money each month. You can only do this much.
Yeah, you got it.
That is the truth.
That's what they do in Russia, too.
Very true. When it comes to a democracy, citizens have a choice when it comes to what they want to do with their life. Whereas with an authoritarian government, the leaders want to control the lives of the people that they are in charge of. They don't want people to have agency in their lives. And China has been more of a authoritarian government for a while. They've never really been they've never been a democracy.
That's why you have sweatshops.
Yeah, that's unfortunately true. When it comes to the Civil War, I talked about that during my last stream, but you two weren't there. There's a few people that were in the chat, but it was just me on camera. And so I'll start actually by asking a question. Was slavery the number one reason why the Civil War happened?
I kind of think so.
I would have to agree. I say it was mainly slavery because people are like, you can't do this to a human being. What is your malfunction? Like they were thinking, why would you do this to another human being?
Yeah, there were a lot of people, especially in the North, that did not approve of slavery, that thought it was immoral.
Yeah, that's why you had a lot of people that were hiding slaves when they were on their way up to the underground
railroads.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. You had the Underground Railroads, which was a way for slaves to escape into the North. Northerners, in some cases, helped with the Underground Railroad. They helped to smuggle slaves to freedom.
Mhm.
In fact, in this regard, the person Harriet Tubman,
Yes,
very
Harriet
important.
Tubman.
Yeah, she was what was a very important figure during that time.
Yes,
She-
she was.
She helped a lot of slaves to be free.
Because she would keep going back.
Yeah.
She wouldn't just stay up there. She'd go back down there and get more. Actually, one fun fact about that, in order to keep the kids quiet, they would use cough syrup. Or sometimes rum.
Oh, to put them to sleep?
Put them to sleep. Yep.
Oh,
To keep the kids quiet, they'd use cough syrup or rum and kept the kids quiet. It would put them to sleep, basically. Not
Mhm.
killing them, but they'd sleep throughout the day, and then when they needed to leave at night, then the kids would be able to leave.
that makes a lot of sense because when slaves used the Underground Railroad to escape, they knew that if they were discovered
They were murdered.
by people from the South, they
Yeah.
would either be horrible. They would either suffer horrible pain or be
Yes.
killed. And so
Yeah.
they had to be really careful when they used the Underground Railroad. That was why they stayed as quiet as possible during the day and then would sneak out at night. In fact, Harriet Tubman ultimately ended up freeing like hundreds of slaves. She even freed her own parents. This,
Yeah, I'm not sure about the number, but it was
a
great.
lot.
Yeah.
yeah. So when it comes to that question of what was the number one reason why the Civil War happened, it's easy to say slavery, but think about this question.
The
Did
South wanted to be on their own too. The South wanted their own government.
They did. Think about this question. Did everyone in the South care about slavery?
No.
No.
Exactly.
So they had the hiding houses.
Yeah,
for
that's
slaves
why
that were still like in the South.
it was the manufacturers, basically the crops, the higher uppy people that had the money and they didn't want to pay for the basically the labor. They didn't want to pay for the labor, so we're gonna smuggle these people in and they're gonna do it for free, and the best they'll get is food.
Yeah, that's
And
very
it's kind of like nowadays with Mexicans crossing the border.
Oh, yeah, that is true actually.
You pay so much amount of money to cross the border, but once you get across the border and you're looking for jobs and stuff, it is kind of a joke, to be honest, because they look for jobs, but they only get paid so much, and yet they hurry up and they don't spend it right away, but they keep it. This is not coming out correctly.
I get what you're saying though,
Mhm.
because think about this: when someone from Mexico works at a factory in America, let's say, oftentimes anyway, they are unfortunately treated differently due to them being an immigrant.
And they're paid under the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, immigrants are paid less than American citizens, especially
because these employers know that they're trying to make a life here, and they'll pretty much do anything.
yeah, they want to make a living for their family. They want to get by, so they're willing to do more than they usually would be willing to do, and especially if an employer thinks that this immigrant came into the country illegally, it's likely that they'll treat them even worse. Before the Civil War, think about it, it was Southerners who were rich and owned plantations that cared about slavery, right? Because they were the Southerners who actually owned slaves.
Yeah,
You're talking about
they needed the slaves to work their land.
yeah, that's
Because they weren't going to work it themselves. Of course not. They can't get their hands dirty. They'll keep the money that they're getting from the profits, but the best they would do would let the slaves have, like, they'd let them have chickens and stuff like that. And then
they
once
would
in a
give
while.
them they would give them some food anyway. They wouldn't give them literally zero food, but they would not give them much at all.
And then
They would just give them the bare minimum.
Yeah, the bare minimum, and then they'd give them shit shacks, as I call them.
Shit.
A shit shack.
The
My
place that the slave lived in.
Yeah, basically, it was so pathetic and run down, and it was just merely wood holding it up. Just that, and you'd have like 20 to 25 people in one little house.
Yeah, they were.
Mhm.
They were very cramped. I mean, think about it this way: when people from Africa, for example, were brought over to the U.S., they were brought in on ships.
Mhm.
How do you think the conditions were on these ships?
Oh, horrible. Disgusting.
Yeah, they were.
A lot of people died from just diseases and things like that.
Yeah, because the hygiene was terrible,
Mhm.
and you had a bunch of people that were cramped together in a small space.
Yep.
Mhm.
That backfired horribly. In fact, if we go back further in time, this is kind of what happened when Europeans came to the New World before America was founded, right? Before the United States of America existed, back when Europeans first came to the continent of North America where Native Americans lived.
Mhm.
When Europeans came over here, they ended up unintentionally spreading their diseases to the Native Americans. They passed them on. And unfortunately, because
Because of that, the Native Americans didn't have the immune system built up for those diseases, so they just died like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, the death tolls for Native Americans back then were really high. The numbers were really high because
Yes, they
Europeans
were.
were spreading polio or other diseases that the Native Americans had no knowledge of and they had not ever experienced before. And think
Mhm.
about it, when you get a vaccine, how is it that that helps you to not get that same disease again?
Because it makes you a little bit sick. That way, your body can start building up your immune system. That's
Yeah,
why oftentimes when people were getting their COVID-19 shots, they were getting sick, some of them, like really bad. But in the long run, that's going to help the immune system be stronger.
Yep,
yeah,
and they actually, with some of the shots and stuff, they actually put the thing in there, the dead ones in there, to make your body go, "Hey, I need to attack that. That's a bad thing."
that's that's very true. And one unfortunate reality of shots in general is that people are going to have different reactions to them.
Exactly.
You know, when one gets a shot, they might, for example, develop a rash, something serious like that, or they might not have any side effects at all.
Right.
Before the Civil War started, poor people in the South didn't care about slavery, you know, because they didn't have any slaves.
Right.
So the reality was there was a larger, more fundamental issue that the North and South disagreed on, and that was federal power versus state rights. In the
Mhm.
North, there was widespread belief that the federal government should have more power. In the South, there was a widespread belief that the states should have more power.
Right.
This disagreement had been building up for a long time. It had been building up for years.
Mhm.
And people tried to find a compromise, especially Henry Clay. He came up with the Clay Compromise, several other proposals like that that were intended to diffuse this tension between the North and the South. The idea was to try to get the North and the South to agree on something.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, those attempts at compromise ended up working out in the short term because they delayed the start of the Civil War, but they didn't work in the long term because, of course, the Civil War ended up happening anyway.
Right.
But even in the North, there wasn't agreement in regards to slavery because you had the abolitionists, for example. They were saying slavery is bad, it needs to end right now. Slaveholders should not be compensated in any way.
Mhm.
But then you also had Northerners who still didn't like slavery, they still wanted it to end, but they were saying it's going to take a long time to actually end slavery. It's going to be a long, complicated process, and slaveholders should be compensated.
Mhm.
They believed in gradual emancipation. So think about a straight line, all right? If you have a line, abolitionists are on one end of the spectrum,
Yep.
one end of the extreme, right? And then kind of in the middle, you have Northerners who believed in gradual emancipation. Then on the other end, you had Northerners who didn't want slavery to expand further than it already had. You know, they didn't want new states to become states that allowed slavery, but they weren't in favor of slavery being gotten rid of in areas where it already existed.
Mhm.
So even though most Northerners were not in favor of slavery, there was not agreement. In fact, before the Civil War started, the political status quo changed a lot. In fact, this was when the Republican Party, as we know it today, actually came into existence. Because before that happened, there was the Democrat Republicans. That was actually one party back then, which seems like,
really.
yeah, it seems like such a contradiction looking at it from
Yeah, it
looking
really
at
does.
yeah,
At a modern point of view.
yeah, looking at it from a modern perspective, it's like, wait, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I
But
cannot compute.
yeah, you had two parties back then, but they were the Democrat Republicans. I think the Whigs, they were a party that existed. I know that.
Democrat Republicans and the Whigs. That's what it
Ah,
was.
Yeah,
The
though
Whigs.
they
The
were
wealthy. The ones who went to Harvard or well, did they have Harvard back then? I didn't think they had Harvard back then, but
the point is,
they went to college. They had the buku bucks.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The Democrat Republicans represented more of the less wealthy individuals, more of the average everyday people. Back then, those were the two parties. Just like how today we have the Democrats and Republicans, of course.
We've also got the
Green Party.
Green Party. You've got the
Independence.
Independent Party.
Yeah, that's true. Nowadays, there are a good amount of smaller third parties that are not the two major political parties. They're not the Democrats or the Republicans. They're smaller parties that are not as well known by people that as a result of that don't have as much influence in the election.
Right.
You know, when election happens, is it very likely that a candidate from the Green Party will get elected?
No.
It's very slim pickings, but yes, it can happen.
It can happen, of course, but saying how likely is it?
not
About
very
a
likely.
20% chance.
Exactly. It's not very likely. It's most likely that a Democrat or Republican will get elected, not a candidate from a smaller, less known third party.
Mhm.
The interesting thing, actually, is that political parties date back to George Washington's presidency.
Yep.
Right.
George Washington was the first president. He set precedent in several different ways.
He was the one who said, no one man should have all this power. That's why, and that is how we got the presidencies nowadays. He was the one who said, no one man should have control over one whole country. This is why we fought Britain for our freedom. This is why we fought against them for all those years. We wanted our freedom. Now we have our freedom. We are not going to let someone take over.
Yes, that's very
Mhm.
true, because as you can imagine, back then, people were really afraid of the leader of the United States becoming the next King George,
Mhm.
becoming the next British king, because, of course, the colonies had suffered a lot under the rule of Britain,
Mhm.
because Britain did not treat the colonies at all. And back then, you had the phrase taxation without
Yeah.
representation.
Yeah.
What?
That was King George taxing them for every little thing, and then their money going back over to Europe, or not Europe, Britain, and staying there pretty much.
That
It
is
would stay in the community, basically.
very true. And because of this fear of the leader of the United States becoming a tyrant, that
Mhm.
led to the Articles of Confederation being the first system of government that America tried. They were in effect for only a couple years, not very long, because it only took people a couple years to realize the flaws of the Articles of Confederation.
Mhm.
The fundamental problem is that it restricted the power of the federal government so drastically that America just couldn't function in general. In fact, back then, America couldn't even pay debts it owed to foreign countries that had helped out the colonies during the Revolutionary War. France was a big example.
Yep, France helped us get away from them. And then France had their own war against them.
France had their war against who? The British?
Against the British. But the United States would not step in because they're like, if we fight in every revolution, where do we stand?
Yeah, in fact, if you think forward to World War II, there was this stance as well. It was a policy of isolationism. Basically, the idea that America should not get involved in the affairs of other countries. America,
because we're still building as a country, we don't want to get overstepped and basically pushed down again and become ruled over.
Hey, Dad, thanks for joining. Yeah, we're talking about history here. Wait. Underground, what's that about?
It's a show. It's about the Underground Railroad and things that they endured. Just trying to get from the south to north. It's called Underground.
That sounds really interesting. Is it a movie, TV show?
It's a TV show.
Wow, that is something that I would definitely be interested in.
Okay.
At first, America stayed independent when Hitler was rising to power. Right at the start of World War II, the U.S. remained uninvolved until the ship the Lusatia was sunk.
Pearl Harbor.
Oh, okay. The Lusatia was for World War One.
Okay.
Back then German U-boats were sinking ships on the sea. When this cruise ship, the Lusatia, was sunk, that led to America becoming involved. Once again, America was not involved immediately. The U.S. only actually joined the war in, I think, 1914, if I remember right. Oh, wait, I'm thinking of this. When did the war start? World
War One or World War II?
I was talking about World War One. Yeah, that was during the 1900s.
Hang on, I can look it up.
But I don't remember exactly when it started.
Yeah, you have a minute left, dude.
Yeah, that's very true. But you raised a good point there. That Pearl Harbor was indeed what caused the U.S. to join World War
I
II.
Started July 28th, 1914, and ended November 11th, 1918.
They were fighting for that long?
It lasted a couple years.
World War II started September 1st, 1939, and didn't end until September 2nd, 1945.
Wow.
Yeah, it lasted for a couple years as well.
The Cold War, if we want to get real technical, the Cold War started March 12th, 47. Didn't end until December 26th of 1991.
What?
Yeah, it lasted for over 40 years. And
goodness.
Yeah, ultimately that was due to the different nature of the Cold War, right? Because it wasn't about two different nations fighting each other on the battlefield. They were fighting each other indirectly through some of the ways we talked about earlier. But also due to assassinations and espionage were two other ways that the Cold War made itself known. This was when Russia founded the KGB, for example, and America founded the CIA. Those are both intelligence agencies that were trying to gather useful intelligence. In fact, the Cold War was when the Red Scare happened. This was when
the Red Scare?
This was when there was widespread fear among Americans that communists were infiltrating the country. Unfortunately, it led to a lot of people being falsely prosecuted or even put to death in some cases out of suspicion that they were communist or they were aiding and abetting communists. In fact, this one senator, Paul McCarthy,
Mhm.
he was a big advocate for this idea that communists were infiltrating the United States. That led to the term McCarthyism, which
I never heard of that.
uh, it was basically him saying that communists were everywhere. It was basically fear mongering.
Got it.
America's leaders are trying to get the people to be scared, to try to get them to believe that there were infiltrators everywhere. So you can't really
like you
trust
have the
very
modern
many
days
people.
now of people thinking that the what is it called what is it called not the Among Us the pyramid scheme, not the pyramid scheme. You know how the dollar bill.
Are you talking about the Illuminati?
Yes, the Illuminati.
Jeez.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
We're getting into conspiracy theories here.
That's basically what fear mongering or fear your thing you said the fear thing was doing. It's basically saying these people are controlling us, but we don't have proof saying that they are.
That is very true. Earlier, I was talking about how the Articles of Confederation didn't work. That's what led to the Constitution being put into place as the supreme law of the land.
Mm-hmm.
But during the time when the Constitution was sent to the states for ratification, there was a lot of disagreement on whether this new Constitution should be put into effect or not. So you had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were in favor of this new Constitution, while the Anti-Federalists were not.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the important thing. You saw right here this disagreement about federal power versus states' rights.
Mm-hmm.
Because while the Federalists were in favor of this new Constitution, the Anti-Federalists were scared that this new Constitution would give the federal government too much power at the expense of the states.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, until the start of the Civil War, the North and the South never agreed
You want to read what it says?
on this matter. I'm going to see what's going on here with him. Yeah, Dad, that's very true. I'm glad you think I did. Yeah, Dad, I'm glad that you think I did a good job summarizing it. I've learned about all this stuff before during school. In fact, I remember back when I was in high school, during my history classes, I would read ahead in the textbook.
Mm-hmm.
I read it a lot because I found it really interesting.
I was the one trying to do independent studies on Rome and Rome, World War II, and Greece.
That is really interesting. How long did you do this independent study for?
I tried to, but they took it away from me. They said you already know enough knowledge, you don't need any more. And I'm like, no, I want to know more. My one history teacher was Mr. Retzel. Famous. He is the greatest history teacher, I have to say. He's really good. And he used, when we got the Harvard Dam in, it's the Harvard Dam?
The Hoover Dam?
Hoover Dam, thank you. The Hoover Dam. He put in there as quoted from the Transformers movie that the reason why the Hoover Dam was invented was to keep the Allspark hidden. Remember? From the first Transformers. He put that in there. None of the other students laughed but me. And he's like, okay, I'm going to need you to keep your mouth shut through the rest of this. And I'm like, okay, I suppose so. Yep.
See you later, Cal.
Yep, see you later, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna call him up his
I can
answer.
keep the conversation going.
That sounds good. No,
Okay, so
hey,
ooh, is he calling you or no?
right. That's a voicemail.
Okay.
Oh.
I don't know what you're typing down there, so I didn't know what you wanted me to say or what you want me to keep going on about.
So yeah, I'm a fan of some. I'm a fan of some of the Transformers movies. Yeah, the Hoover Dam, and the Hoover Dam was a big deal.
Yes,
That
it
is-
killed. It actually, it was one of the main things during the Great Depression was to be created was the Hoover Dam. It was supposed to create jobs. It was supposed to. It was supposed to create jobs and create revenue, basically. But if I'm doing it right, it didn't really do that well of its job per se because it did kill so many people, and it was just really hard for them to keep up with it. That's just my interpretation of it, my take on it. But I mean, yes, it came out as a lovely dam and it's working still to this day, but it's still hard to figure out if it's was worth it or not.
that is true. Yeah, when it comes when it comes to when it comes to a civil war, let's see, the interesting thing is that the North was using this strategy they call.
Why are we talking about the North? We were just talking about the Hoover Dam.
I know. I just decided to. So I just decided to switch topics a bit.
Okay.
When the North used something called the Anaconda strategy against the South. This is where
They stronghold them, basically, is where they said, we're going to keep our stuff away from yours. Am I right?
Yeah, it's true. The Confederacy had all these strongholds that were along bodies of water.
Mm-hmm.
They were important to the Confederacy because the South never was very industrialized. They never embraced manufacturing very much. They were focused on farming, on plantations, on agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
really, whereas the North did industrialize a lot. This really helped out the North a lot during the Civil War. Why? Because they had a lot more access to railroads. What did this mean?
They could. Dude, I'm blanking. You just say it. I'm totally blanking.
This meant that the North could move supplies around, food. They could move around food, guns, other supplies, whatever they wanted, a lot more easily than the South could, because they had a lot more access to railroads. Ultimately, this is one of the big reasons why the North end up winning, because they industrialized a lot more and they slowly took over these strongholds that the Confederacy had built. And so much like a snake, some snakes use their tail to squeeze their prey.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the North basically did. They squeezed in the South more and more until
they finally broke.
Until the South was fully pushed back to their capital of Richmond, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point, the North had taken over all of these different strongholds. In fact, as the war went on, the South ran out of supplies more and more. I mean, they were running out of food, they were running out of guns, they were running out of everything that they needed. And on top of that, the North embraced this strategy called total warfare. What this meant is that they would march throughout the South and destroy railroads or kill animals.
Mm-hmm.
And they would get rid of anything that the South could use to their advantage. There was this one member of the military named George T. Sherman. He and Union soldiers went on this march all throughout the South, and this led to the South being pushed deeper and deeper into the South, and eventually, of course, to Richmond. In fact, one of the big reasons why the Battle of Gettysburg was such a big deal is because this was the last time that the South fought on Northern soil.
Hmm.
After that, the South was on the defensive throughout the rest of the Civil War. They did not go on the offense after that point because the Battle of Gettysburg ended up being a big loss for the South. They lost a lot of men, and they lost their momentum as well. Before the Battle of Gettysburg, things were more even between the North and the South. In fact, there's one general that was nicknamed Stonewall Jackson. He was very inspirational for Confederate soldiers because he did such a great job on the battlefield that he was given the nickname of Stonewall Jackson. So he rallied Confederate soldiers a lot, but at a certain point, that ended up not happening anymore. Dad, that's very true, and that actually ties into what I was saying just a couple minutes ago about how during the later years of the war, the North just marched through the South more and more, destroying anything that was in their way, and that was definitely brutal, though also effective at the same time, of course. And actually, there's been a good amount of movies or TV shows done about the Civil War. I mean, there's this movie called Lincoln that was made. I don't remember exactly when, but that ended up. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I remember that it got good reviews. And
I've never seen it.
the interesting thing about Lincoln is that right when the Civil War started, about the first couple of years, he did not say that the Civil War was about ending slavery. He said it was about restoring the Union. One of the major reasons for that is because Lincoln was afraid that if he openly denounced slavery, openly stated that the Civil War is about ending slavery, it would cause southern states that had not seceded from the Union, aka the border states, to
completely go, nope, we're not in with you no more.
Yeah, Lincoln believed that if the border states were to leave, that would be a major blow to the Union. So he wanted to avoid that at all costs. And on top of that, Lincoln did not want the South, the Confederacy, to be recognized as a legitimate state because, as far as he was concerned, these southern states were simply in rebellion against the Union.
Yeah.
He didn't think that they had a legitimate or constitutional right to secede from the Union. And so he did not want any other nations to formally recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate state.
Yeah.
Because he believed that would be a major blow for the Union. Because if that happened, then sympathy would go towards the South rather than the North.
Yep.
That would make the South look like the victims. But Lincoln did not believe at all that they were the victims in this case. He believed that they had illegally left the Union. This is actually one of the major reasons why he passed the Emancipation Proclamation. Because he saw that it was possible that a nation like Great Britain might recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate, independent nation. He wanted to avoid that at all costs. And so he created the Emancipation Proclamation, which absolutely had symbolic value because it changed the course of the war completely. It turned the war from one just about restoring the Union to one about ending slavery. But practically speaking, there were limitations to the Emancipation Proclamation. For example, this was not a constitutional amendment or a law. When an amendment is added to the Constitution, it remains in effect. It's not going to be repealed at all or gotten rid of. If you're talking about a law, that's a different story. what the Emancipation Proclamation actually was an executive wartime order
Hmm.
put into place by President Lincoln. That meant is it was only in effect for as long as the Civil War persisted. Lincoln knew that once the war was over, the courts could come in and strike down the Emancipation Proclamation as being unconstitutional.
Mhm.
This was one of the major reasons why he believed that it was important for the 13th Amendment to be passed, which ultimately ended up happening, though it was not easy at the same time. Dad, feel free to post about anything you want, okay? It can be about what we're talking about, but it can be about anything else either. In fact, actually, I'm now going to switch topics a little bit. I really enjoy doing activities like tubing or going on boat or going on jet ski or going swimming. I'm a fan of quite a lot of different water activities, though admittedly I haven't gone water skiing before, where you have basically a ski on each foot
Hmm.
and you're holding onto a rope
Yep, I know what the
that's
water
an
skiing is.
that's then attached to a boat. I haven't done that before.
Can you read it out loud so I know what you're
Specifically.
saying?
And Deb, you're saying here that so what you're saying is that Lincoln was opposed to slavery the entire time, but he did not say it for political reasons. Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it. In fact, the truth is Lincoln was rather politically savvy. For example, before the Civil War actually started, he was campaigning throughout both the North and the South. What did this mean? Well, it meant he was speaking sometimes to abolitionists in the North and at other times to slaveholders in the South,
Hmm.
two opposite ends of the spectrum. So what he did is he said different things to these different groups.
Yeah.
I mean, if he was speaking to abolitionists, he would emphasize how bad slavery was and how it needed to end immediately. But on the other hand, if he was speaking to slaveholders, he would not
Yeah,
say
you would not say
that same thing. Rather, he would say that if slavery were to expand further than it already had, then it was only a matter of time before Southerners would be forced to live alongside either slaves or just Negroes, African Americans in general. So therefore, what he was really doing was saying what these different groups wanted to hear.
That's basically what they're doing nowadays. I'll say what you want to hear on the TV, but when it comes to voting, you got to do your own study and your own research on who's the better campaigner, who's the better vote here.
Yeah, I can.
Because you've got so many slur campaigns against both parties that you don't know who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the big difference today is that not only does the internet exist, but there's also social media.
Mm-hmm.
You think about it in general, the benefit of social media is that it allows you to get your thoughts out there very easily. But this can become a drawback because it makes it much easier for people to get very divided.
Yeah.
Now,
You've got the thing right now. I watch Dr. Phil every day but Mondays and Wednesdays. But I watch Dr. Phil constantly. The latest one was actually about weed. Is it right to have medical marijuana or is it wrong? Basically, who's right, who's wrong? That was the argument. And Dr. Phil was just sitting there letting them speak back and forth about it. And I'm probably going to get hit with copyright things, but am I going to get hit with copyright? Are we going to get hit with? Because we're not using any songs or anything. We're just saying his name.
Yeah, that shouldn't be the case.
Okay.
I don't see.
Okay.
I don't
I
see
hope
why.
not.
Interesting. I don't think I've seen Dr. Phil before, but
3:00 every day. You'll miss it, but I watch him every day. I'm an avid watcher. I go back and watch episodes. This season is now all on the topics of what's right, the transgenders. Is it right for them to be in their, like, say they're born a male and they're a female? Is it right for them to compete with the females? Because they're going to break the females' titles because they're technically males.
In general, what I believe is that if someone is born male or born female, that is what sex they are, period. I don't believe in any kind of gray area at all. I believe that God created human beings as male or female. Nothing in between, nothing in the middle, none of this weird gray area. In fact,
some people, I can understand your point of view, but some people believe I'm in the wrong body. My soul is supposed to be in this body and not in this gender. Or I'm not supposed to be this gender. Why am I this gender? Because they see it as I don't want, or not as an I don't want, it's an I don't feel correct in this gender. I feel like I'm more of a female. Why am I put into a male's body?
In general, I believe that if someone tries to change what sex they biologically are, what sex they're born as, I think that is wrong and unnatural.
Well, then you've got people who are non-binary, who don't identify as any gender. I think that's the right one. Yeah, they don't identify as any gender.
Okay, I've heard of non-binary before, but I'm trying to think of what that means in practice. What do they not use the words he or she at all? Is that what it means?
They use they, them.
Okay, that's
Yep,
interesting.
they have pronouns. Yep, they have pronouns now. So say I think I'm a guy, I would be Sean. You can't call me Eliza. You have to call me Max or something. And you go, oh, well, she is doing this. No, you can't say that. You have to go, oh, he is doing this to be right.
Okay, that is interesting. I would say the big difference is when you're talking about that situation that you just described, you're not talking about someone who's actively trying to change what sex they biologically are.
No, but they're changing their pronouns.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Once it starts with changing the pronouns. Then it starts with changing the clothing. Then it goes to changing, basically, pardon the French, but cutting things off and repasting them. I said cutting things off and repasting them.
Don't go any further than that, though.
I wasn't going to.
Okay, that is good. That's good to hear. So if we're just talking about someone saying, okay, I know that I am biologically male, but I don't want to be identified as male. Okay, that's one thing. I don't personally agree with that. That seems weird to me, but there's a difference there because you're not talking about someone actively trying to change what sex they biologically are. I am just 100% opposed to trying to change what sex you're born as. I don't think that humans have the right to change what sex they're born as. In fact, nowadays it's pretty confusing if you think about it, right? Because there's so many different terms out there.
I don't know. Nowadays you can identify as anything, and I'm not kidding you. At the middle school here, this is not a joke. Kids are identifying as they are cats. So they had to put a litter box in the bathrooms.
What?
Because they're identifying as cats.
Yeah, that is.
This is where they take it too far.
That's really weird. Yeah, that's the thing. Nowadays, there's so much ambiguity, so much grayness, so much confusion that it's hard, really, really hard for people to keep up. I don't know what a lot of these terms mean. I've heard a lot of different things out there, before, but I just find it so weird that nowadays there's so much confusion out there regarding sex when it should be very simple.
Yeah.
Now there's definitely a difference, I would say, between one's biological sex versus their gender. I know that sounds confusing, but what I mean is that I look at gender as what society thinks of male and female. Basically, what things they ascribe to the two different sexes. I think there's absolutely a line in the sand between them. But moving on though, I also really enjoy doing paintball or laser tag. I think those two games are really fun. Do you agree?
I've had paintball without. We played paintball gun with me, my sister, and my dad back in the cities, but we didn't have all the gear and stuff. So we'd end up waiting a few weeks. We'd do it like months before school started. And we didn't have the gear and stuff. So we'd end up with bruises all over our body.
Wow, that's exactly why I think that if you're going to do paintball, it's smarter to try to go to an official paintball course
Well, yeah.
where there are rules in place. There are like referees, officials there who are in charge of everything, and
Yep.
there's equipment that they give you.
Have you ever gotten into a rubber band fight?
I don't think I have. What do you
Rubber
mean?
band fights are so much fun. They used to make rubber band guns. And what they would do is, the rubber bands you use for like rubber band balls?
Oh, yeah.
Not the ones you put in your hair, but the ones that are literally rubber and not coated with some cloth. So we'd use those ones and we'd load our guns up. And they're just like little spinning things. So you put it in and you'd hook it up to the back part. And then when you pulled the trigger, it would rotate and shoot it. So we have attacks like that with me and my sister. Those were fun. Or else you'd have the marshmallow fights with the guns.
What?
The marshmallow fights.
What? Seriously?
You take the fruity marshmallows, the itty bitty fruity flavored marshmallows, and we'd have PVC pipe, the small ones, and we'd stick like one or two in at a time, and we'd go, and it would shoot across, and we'd attack each other with it.
Wow, that is pretty creative.
That's how we had fun, and then that's how we got mice.
Because of the marshmallows, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, we couldn't find some, so and then they came out with Nerf guns, and it's like, hey, that's a better idea.
Yeah, I remember when I used to own Nerf guns. Those are a ton of fun. I had, for example, a Nerf gun where you put one of the plastic bullets in the chamber. Then, of course, you pull the trigger and shoots. And you can store one bullet on the bottom. And there was also a type of gun I had that had a barrel where you put the Nerf bullets into, so then you can go through 6 rounds. And I had one that you could put 10 Nerf bullets on. There was a circle with containers for each individual Nerf bullet. So you put 10 in, and then you fire one, you still have 9 left, so you can fire 9 more times, and obviously you can put new Nerf bullets in. And this one Nerf gun where you fired these little green discs, actually.
Oh, the little green discs.
Yeah, not necessarily regular Nerf bullets, rather these green discs that actually fired pretty far. Sometimes I would be in the living room, I would go behind the couch, fire this one Nerf gun, and the green disc would go like all the way to the dining room. It would go a long ways. And when I was a student at SMSU, there's this guy I knew that had these Nerf guns that you could fire semi-automatically. They were like they were like pistols. You could put just a few Nerf bullets in them, like 3 or 4 maybe.
Dude, they have those nowadays. They have um they have it where it's like a giant circle and you put all the Nerf bullets in and then you hook it up and you can just hold the trigger and just chunk 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 and then it goes through the whole circle thing.
That
Like
would be,
no joke.
that would be a lot of fun if you can fire automatically. Really, I know that if you go to Walmart, Target, one of those major stores, you can see Nerf guns there where they have this big clip.
Yep.
You can put a ton of Nerf bullets in them. Those would be a lot of fun. In fact, I remember I used to have these 2 Nerf swords actually.
Oh my god, the Nerf swords.
Yeah, I had these 2 foam ones that, of course, you could fight another person with, or you could combine them into a dual-bladed saber. You could basically become Darth Maul. Because in Star Wars, he has this double-bladed lightsaber.
Me and my sister back then, they didn't have Nerf stuff. So we'd take a metal broomstick and a tree branch. And if we got frustrated with each other, we'd go out in the front yard and we wouldn't hit each other on the body parts. So we wouldn't leave bruises. We'd just attack each other with our swords. And that's how we would do it. Those were our swords back then.
Okay.
Because our dad wouldn't let us use the real swords that he had.
Oh, interesting.
Yep, he collected swords. I've got the daggers.
Okay.
I have collectible item daggers.
Wow, that's really interesting. Because while I have used Nerf swords before, I haven't used a real sword before. I haven't done fencing, for example.
Oh no, these aren't fencing swords. These are medieval swords.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I've definitely watched movies or TV shows where you see knights, for example, wielding a sword, or Japanese samurai using a sword. But I personally have not done fencing before. Have you done that before?
Nope. Well, no, we didn't. We did it in play practice where you do the traditional 1, 2, 1, 2, basically. And then you do the footwork with it. That was about it.
That is really interesting. I have fired a real gun before, though admittedly not in some time. I've only done that a few times. I remember when I was a student at SMSU, I went to this course one time where you shoot these clay pigeons. One year when I went to a summer Boy Scout camp, I took a shotgun class. I fired at these clay pigeons.
I took a gun class. I know how to do archery.
Yeah, I've done archery before as well. I used to do that in high school gym class. And also
I was going to say our gym class never did that.
Oh, interesting. What did you do for gym class?
Gym class was basketball, soccer, the occasional dodgeball, which everyone knew, track and field, football. Did I say football already?
I don't think so, anyway.
And then they did floor hockey. They did badminton and pickle.
Yeah, I did.
And then they do the regular mile, and then the president test. Where you would do the sit and reach, how many pull-ups you can do, the sit-ups, the presidential test, basically.
Yeah, I remember how there's certain times of the year where students are required to complete a certain amount of push-ups and sit-ups, other physical activities.
Yeah, they had to test our strength, and I would be the one over there. I'm like, what's the point of this? Well, it's to see how strong you are. And I'm like, okay. So I held on to the pull-up bar, and I just hung there. And they're like, you going to do a pull-up? And I'm like, no, I don't want to. Then get down. And I'm like, no, I'm going to waste your guys' time.
I did push-ups, sit-ups, along with that activity you described where you put your hands forward and you're trying to push
you keep your middle fingers like this, and you sit and you see how far you can reach with your legs being straight. You'd have two people on either side of you pushing down on your knees so you couldn't bend them.
Yeah, that is very true. I never really did pull-ups. I did not do them very often at all. I remember also when I was a part of Boy Scout Troop 31, the Scouts were also required to complete a certain amount of physical activities.
Our Girl
Some-
Scouts weren't.
How long were you part of Girl Scouts for?
Until I became a brownie. So that was daisies to brownies. That's like a couple of years, 2-3 years.
Interesting. I was a part of Boy Scouts for several years. I mean, I first joined the troop shortly after moved to Bergen. I don't remember exactly when I joined the troop at first, but it was probably only a couple months after I moved to Bergen. I was active in the troop until I graduated from high school, started off 6th grade, so I was part of that troop for about 6 years. And after I graduated, I still occasionally went to a Tuesday night meeting, but I didn't go every Tuesday like I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We were forced to do Girl Scouts.
Oh,
Like, I didn't like it because then you had to be cute and pretty and all that stuff and act like a normal kid. No, we were forced to do it by our dad. He said we had to do it. And he wanted us to do it basically for the cookies. Because if you're a Girl Scout and you order cookies, you get a discount on them.
oh, yeah, I have seen Girl Scout cookies before.
But we got a discount on, say, if we don't sell all those boxes we order, we got to keep them.
I see. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Of the Girl Scouts, you have Girl Scout cookies, but you think about it, there's not really Boy Scout cookies.
No,
Not
you
in
guys
the-
do
not
the
in the
popcorn
same-
and the
not-
raffling.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I remember how sometimes we go over to the parents of one of the scouts' home to go swimming, either just for fun or to complete swimming requirements, where you have to like swim across the pool, swim from one end of the pool to the other, and then go back to the other end. For
Mhm.
example, I remember I used to complete these requirements. I would go to camp. Dad, yeah, motorcycle riding is a lot of fun. You're saying my favorite outdoor activity is motorcycle riding. I'm not sure if that counts. Oh, that absolutely counts, Dad. That's doing something outside. Yeah, I think riding a motorcycle or riding a bicycle or riding a scooter, those are all fun.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, I've never learned how to do skateboarding or rollerblading or roller skating, but
I know how to ride a skateboard. I used to have a skateboard. Well, I still do. It's in my mom's storage. The only way we could tell the skateboards apart from me and my sister was mine was blue, hers was orange.
Interesting.
Because
Yeah.
at that time they only seen male skaters, so they didn't have like pink ones and purple ones.
Interesting. I used to have a scooter. The funny thing is that it wasn't even a newer electronic one.
Yeah, it was the push one.
Yeah, exactly. I would ride that around the various apartment complexes when I lived in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin.
Mhm.
That was a lot of fun. And when my parents moved to New York, I still had the skateboard. I had it for a time, but at a certain point, though, I did stop using it.
Mhm.
There was a brief window of time where my two close friends, Grady and Jake, along with mainly them, were doing skateboarding. I knew that they were skateboarding. I would go to skateboard parks with them where they would ride their skateboard. I would just bring along my scooter and ride that. I also had a bicycle when I lived in New York. I would ride around town. That was a lot of fun. And then, yeah, my dad showed me motorcycle riding.
Mhm.
Which is
I used to motorcycle ride with my dad until he started playing chicken. Do you know what playing chicken is?
I don't know if I do.
Playing chicken is where you swerve in and out of traffic.
Yikes.
Or when you play chicken with a bicyclist and you're going as fast as the other one is, and whoever turns last or whoever turns first is the chicken.
Oh, wow, that is not safe at all.
Oh yeah, we played chicken all the damn time. It was fun.
Oh, that's okay. Yikes.
Playing it on a bicycle, not a motorcycle. Playing it on a bicycle was easier than doing it with a motorcycle. Because the motorcycle, you didn't know if the car in front of you would slam on their brakes and do brake tests.
That's very true. My dad knows this from experience. He took a safety course for motorcycle riding. They taught him all about how to ride safely.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he was taught is that if you're turning a corner, for example, if you're making a turn, you want to do it gradually. You don't want to turn really hard.
Yeah.
Because then it becomes easier to lose your balance, which of course can result in you skidding or being flown off the motorcycle entirely, which can of course result in serious bodily injury or even death. So if you're riding a motorcycle, you definitely want to do it safely. In fact, weaving through traffic is not a safe thing to do because you don't know if the cars are going to see you.
Brake check on you.
Yeah, you don't know if they're going to see you or react appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if, for example, you're talking about the cities and there's a ton of traffic. If you're talking about the Twin Cities
Mm-hmm.
in Minnesota.
We were talking about St. Paul. I lived in St. Paul.
Yeah, that is a very busy area where there's a ton of traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So especially if you're riding a motorcycle in St. Paul, you really want to do it safely or else you're taking a pretty big risk.
Mm-hmm. We'd be the neighbors that pissed everyone off because 2, 3 in the morning, all of a sudden you hear the Harley going on, going, and then he'd be going down. He'd purposely gun it a good few times and then leave.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can imagine other people being unhappy. Because, really? That Harley is so loud. My dad doesn't actually have a Harley. He has a decent motorcycle, one that's not overly cheap. It's a good motorcycle,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also not super fancy. It's not super expensive. I don't remember exactly.
My dad had 2 Harleys. He had one named, what was it? It was a deep purple, and I think we called it Meg or something from Hercules because Meg was in the purple dress. And then we had another one that was like a baby blue, like a really cute baby blue, and we called it Blue. And then after the divorce and everything, me and my sister found the hot pink spray paint, and needless to say, we left that baby blue with bubblegum pink.
I see.
No joke, bubblegum pink.
Man, I just sad to hear that you had a motorcycle named Blue, then you didn't name another motorcycle Jewel. Blue movies. I've seen Hercules before. That is a good movie. I haven't seen it in some time. It's a movie I've watched recently, but I've watched it before. There's some other Disney movies that I've seen before, but not in some time. I'm just trying to remember what those would be. I'm not sure exactly, but I remember that I watched Tangled again pretty recently. I don't remember exactly what day that was, but I really enjoyed it. The funny thing about that movie is that the horse manages to have a lot of personality.
I love the horse. I love Maximus.
Yeah.
And Pascal. Those are my favorite characters, Maximus and Pascal.
Yeah.
And then Flynn going, "Are you here to apologize?"
Yeah. The funny thing is that even though those 2 animals don't talk at any point, they still manage to convey emotion and have a personality just simply as a result of their facial expressions and body language.
Mm-hmm. Like my cat Minnie. You know Minnie. The skinnier one where you pat her butt and she's like, "Meow, meow, 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 meow. Oh my God, this is amazing." And all she does is talk. She comes up to you and she's like, "Meow." She has her different tones of voice, and one of them's giving me attitude. She gives me attitude, and she'll look at me and she'll sit there and then she'll be like, "Meow." And I'm like, You think so? And she's like, she just sits there and gives me those diva look and just, I know what I'm doing and I know what I want and you're not giving it to me. And I'm like, I'm not going to give it to you either.
That's pretty funny. And I know that sometimes, or one of our cats will give us a look that says, "Please, I want to eat." Well, especially Toby, because he's a big boy. It'll be right before their mealtime. And he'll look up with those puppy dog eyes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, please give me something to eat. It's pretty fun. It's really funny. Animals can definitely convey some emotion through just the tone of the sounds they make, or facial expressions, or body language. Obviously, it depends on the type of animal, but it definitely happens.
Yep.
However, in a movie like Tangled, the animals definitely convey more emotion than you would see in real life.
Yeah.
They definitely have more of a personality than you see with like an actual horse or a chameleon. Horses are definitely, convey some emotion, but in Tangled, there was one scene where Flynn Rider is tossed on the back of the horse Maximus. He's like, thank you so much for coming to rescue me. You don't know how much this means to me.
And he looks at him and is like, shut up, let's go.
Yeah, that's true. Like, guy, you're going on for too long.
And then it's like, oh, you're right, let's go.
Yeah, that is very true. The funny thing actually is that there's people out there who've developed good friendships with animals that you would not normally associate with. For example, there's this guy named Valentine Gruner who developed a good friendship with a female lion named Serga, or lioness, because he saved her from hunters or poachers. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but man, you watch videos on YouTube, you see Valentine open up this door, and Serga just comes bounding up to him and hugs him, and they cuddle down on the ground. Yeah, Dad, I agree with you there. You're saying that's not something I would ever do. You get in and out of traffic. Yeah, exactly. Especially if we're talking about rush hour.
Oh yeah, that was loads of fun during rush hour. Totally. Or when the light changes to yellow, that he said so it's green, yellow, red. Green means go, yellow means slow down, and red means stop. Instead of slowing down, he would say yellow means gun it and go faster. We've gotten so close to so many tickets. It wasn't even funny.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. As another example, you got this lady from Florida who actually took in these two tigers, and they both live with her. I don't remember exactly what the names are here, but that's something that most people would not do, as you can imagine. Because when you're talking about wild animals that are not domesticated,
that are known to attack humans.
Yeah, exactly. When you're talking about those type of animals, it is possible to develop a good friendship with them. But is it easy? No. And that's exactly why there's really only a couple people out there who form those type of relationships. Also, you have a couple that took in this hippo when the hippo was just a baby. In fact, this hippo was actually a newborn, and this couple actually raised this hippo, but without keeping it in captivity at all. So this hippo will still go out into the wild to interact with wild hippos, but then come back. And actually, the lady here is named Shirley. Jan. Oh, okay. Now it's coming back to me. I remember. So there's this lady named Janice Holly who took in these two tigers, and it actually raised them. Oh, which, as you can imagine, takes a lot of work. Right?
And a lot of food.
Yeah, that's
A
very
lot of
true.
meat.
Yeah, because if you're talking about a tiger, then they require a lot of food in order to survive. So the cost of that would definitely add up.
Oh, yeah.
And actually specifically it's Bengal tigers that Leslie that Leslie has a good friendship with, which is pretty funny, right? Because most people would say like, "What are you What are you doing? That's crazy," right? Um, okay, so actually, I got it. All right. A woman's name is Janice Haley's 57 years old. It keeps two Bengal tigers in her garden.
Where's she from?
From Florida. Yeah. And let's see here. Sure. Look. Oh yeah. Okay. I remember. I remember now. Oh, Dad, what do you say here? Back to the subject of gender identity. I agree with you, Sean, but it's not a simple issue, particularly for those who struggle with it. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It can be difficult at times, that's for sure. Either because this person has been struggling with it for a while, or because their family doesn't accept them, or because of all the confusion that exists nowadays. Dad said here, I love our cats, but like all cats, they're pretty self-centered. Yeah, that is definitely true. Generally speaking, dogs are more sociable. They tend to be more friendly than cats are. Obviously, this can vary on a case by case basis. It's not like all cats are antisocial or aloof. No, that's not the case at all.
He can walk into my house and there's Minnie sitting at the door going, "Yo, who's this person?" You've done that before. You've walked in and go, "Hey, buddy."
Yeah.
Minnie and Coraline sit there going, "Who's this person?" Or else they sit there as soon as they hear the keys going in the apartment or into the lock, they sit there and go, "Oh, look, it's Mom. I wonder if she's got any treats."
Yeah, that is very true. Great example of how not all cats are aloof or antisocial. I was just talking from a more general perspective.
Yeah, general persistence.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people out there would say kind of the same thing, that they think in general dogs tend to be a bit more social than cats. But there's some cats that definitely go against that. In fact, actually, I remember now. Names are Tony and Shirley Joubert. They found this hippo several years back that had been washed up in a flood. Therefore, had been separated from its mother, and so it didn't have any parents at all. So the two of them decided to raise this hippo. They feed this hippo milk. But as I said earlier, they also allow the hippo to go upstream to interact with wild hippos. Therefore, the hippo might be gone for a good amount of time, but it always comes back. Also, as another example, there's this guy named Mark Dumas who has a strong friendship with a fully grown polar bear.
Nice.
Yeah, that sounds pretty crazy. What happened is that this guy was working on a film. There was this one young polar bear that was struggling because its mother didn't know how to provide for it properly, how to fulfill its needs properly. So Mark Dumas basically became this hippo's parent.
You mean
There-
the polar bear?
I'm saying that
You said Mark or
that's the name of the guy.
that helped the polar bear.
Yeah, exactly.
You just called it a hippo.
That's not what. If that's how it came out, that's not what I meant.
I know. That's why I was
That's
correcting
not-
you.
It's not what I meant at all. What I'm trying to say is that there's this guy named Mark Dumas who ended up pretty much raising this young polar bear. So he would stay up late at night, for example, to be there for the polar bear.
Mhm.
This allowed Mark Dumas to develop a unusual relationship with this polar bear. Because most people are not going to get too friendly with a polar bear
Oh yeah.
because they're wild animals. So this type of relationship is definitely not easy to have. It requires a lot of time, a lot of effort. I mean, Mark Dumas spent years with this polar bear and knew it ever since it was very young. That's one of the major keys to this guy developing this unusual friendship with a polar bear. And in fact, there's also this guy named Kevin Richardson. He's kind of like this guy Steve Irwell. I don't know if you've heard of him before.
The Australian man that goes after crocodiles and stuff who got stung by a stingray.
Yeah,
I know
that-
who he is.
yeah, exactly. Steve Irwell was also this guy who interacted a lot with wild animals, which obviously most people do not do. Unfortunately, it ended up backfiring for him in the end. As you can
Well,
imagine,
if he would have stayed alive if he didn't pull the stinger out. If he would have waited for the ambulance and stuff to get to him, and they would have done their procedure, he would still be alive. But instead, he pulled it out.
Interesting. Dad, you're saying here, with regard to Shirley, I've never heard of a mix of an animal being both wild and domesticated. Here's the thing. I watched this 50-minute, hour-long documentary about this biologist who goes out to all these different places to interview basically people who have unusual relationships with animals that most people do not get overly friendly with.
It's basically like a cat too. Like with the hippo, how it comes and goes. You can have cats that come inside, hang out, and then go outside for a day or two.
Yeah, that's exactly true. You can have either a pet cat or one that's domesticated, or you can have one that's wild as well. But
They can both be the same. That's what I'm saying. The cat can come and go as they please.
Yeah, exactly. What I was just saying there is some people have indoor cats that don't go outside.
Mhm.
That's the case with Toby and Tabitha. They've never been outdoor cats. They've always been indoor cats.
Mhm.
But then if you're talking about someone who lives on a farm, for example, they might have cats that live out in the barn or or maybe just in the area.
But what I'm saying is, like some people in the cities, they put their tag on their cat and they let the cats come inside, hang out for a day, and then if they want to go outside, they can just walk right outside.
That is very true.
Mhm.
People have different preferences for sure when it comes to
The cat
whether
comes
to-
and goes as they please. You can't
Yeah.
force it.
Yeah, exactly. People have different preferences when it comes to whether they want to have purely indoor pets or pets that are both indoor and outdoor,
Mhm.
or even maybe ones that are fully outdoor. But getting back to what I was saying just a couple minutes ago, when this biologist interviews these different people who have unusual relationships with these animals, and she interviews Tony and Shirley Joubert, they flat out say that we consider our hippo Jessica to be a wild animal. They do not view this hippo as a pet. They don't view this animal as being domesticated. They just have a special relationship with this hippo because they've invested a lot of time and effort into developing this relationship. I mean, they've known the hippo Jessica since she was a newborn, right from the very beginning, really. That's why this type of relationship is not common at all, because most people would not be willing to invest that much time. In fact, Kevin Richardson is actually a prime example, because this guy doesn't just simply interact with wild animals. No, he actually spends a ton of time with animals, to the point where he doesn't really interact all that much with other people. In fact, this guy even has a close bond with a pack of hyenas.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, because it sounds like that would be really dangerous, right? Because hyenas are animals that can inflict serious harm if they choose to.
If they choose to, but hyenas are known for scavenging.
That is very true. They're similar to vultures in that sense, because both animals are scavengers. Kevin Richardson has actually spent over 10 years with this pack of hyenas. That's why he has such a good relationship with them, because he's invested so much time and effort into getting these hyenas to trust him. But even then, he's flat out told interviewers that he's been injured before. That he's not gone through this unscathed. I mean, during this documentary, when he's interviewed about his relationship with these hyenas, he flat out states, with hyenas, it's always the hard way. They'll bite you, and they'll ask questions later. And so he knows that this is not easy at all. In fact, these hyenas are not domesticated either. They're not pets by any means. No, they are wild animals. So what Kevin Richardson does is become part of the pack, basically. Because you know how certain types of animals have a hierarchy, where there's an animal that's the alpha.
Like the hyenas, the females are the alphas.
Oh, that's the case, huh? Okay.
Yep, just like clownfish. In clownfish, the females are the top ones, and you have a lead female. And say if that lead female dies and you've got the next one is a male, that male will change its gender, because they can do that. They can change their gender.
Yeah, certain animals can.
Yep, and then they change their gender, and then they become the next lead female.
Yeah, that's very true. With certain type of animals, you have a pyramid, really, where you have the alpha or the leader of the pack at the top, and then the other animals, for that reason, are submissive toward the animal who's the pack leader or the alpha, whatever word you want to use.
Beta, omega.
Yeah, you could use those words as well. So, like, the reason why Kevin Richardson has been able to develop this close relationship with these hyenas is due to his understanding of their social structure, or their hierarchy or pyramid, whatever word you want to use. He knows how to be dominant when necessary.
Yep.
That's part of a pack hierarchy. Is you have one animal that's the dominant one, and then other animals that are the submissive ones.
Yep.
Therefore, Kevin Richardson knows how to be dominant when necessary to ensure that he keeps his place in the hierarchy. And on top of that, this guy also has a nickname, the Lion Whisperer, because he also has close bonds with lions, to the point where he'll sleep with them, or take baths with them, or in general get really up close and personal, which most people, of course, don't do, because lions hunt other animals, and they, of course, can inflict serious injury on humans if they choose to. That's it. Oh, that sounds good. All right, thanks for joining today.
Yeah, no problem.
See you later. All right, Cal. I think that was a good discussion.
What's my name?
Eliza.
You called me Raquel.
Oh, silly me. Let's see. Though, Dad, if you're still there, feel free to post about again anything you want. I mean, you can say that either, hey, Sean, I think you should discuss this, or I'm going to be running off soon, or whatever the case may be. The funny thing is, actually, I have a ton of objects around the room here that are sentimental for me. For example, I have these cars right here that I used to use to participate in Pinewood Derbies. This was several years ago when I was a part of Boy Scouts. I would go to these derbies, use these cars to compete in them. The point was to see which car could get down to the bottom of the ramp first. Whichever person had that car was the one who won the Pinewood Derby. In fact, actually, right here, silly me. Right here, we have these airplanes that my dad gave me a long time ago, years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but I got this black one, this blue one, which is from the Blue Angels, actually, a group that me and Dad have seen perform before. They are really, really skilled, really talented. And then got this plane. In fact, here's a funny thing. There's this one. Yeah, I got. Yeah, this airplane has this whole light up sequence that started by pressing this button. In fact, now actually I'm remembering again. This documentary is one that shows this lady named Liz Bonin who goes around interviewing all of these different people. It's pretty insightful, I have to say. I've watched it multiple times. So, Dad, are you still there in the chat? If so, just post something so that I know that you're still there. At this point, I'm probably going to be running off soon, actually. But a funny thing is, I also have several books lying around. Like, I have this book right here named The Hot Zone. Yeah, Dad, you're saying I was waiting for you to talk about the hyenas. These relationships are not only unusual, they're dangerous to the human beings. Yeah, that is indeed very true. In fact, Dad, when this guy, Kevin Richardson, has been interviewed before about his relationship with these hyenas, he's flat out stated before that he's been injured as a result of spending so much time with these hyenas. I mean, when Liz Bonin interviews him, she flat out states, why on earth would you want to do this when you know that it can be dangerous? Because he had just stated that I have been bitten before. I have been injured before. And how does Kevin Richardson respond to that? Well, he says that this is not a case of me just interacting with hyenas that I've known for 5 minutes or anything like that. No, this is a relationship that's developing with some of these hyenas for about 14 years. That's true there, Dad. You're saying There have been many instances of these exotic animals turning on their owners, sometimes killing them. Yeah, that's definitely true, which is exactly why it is, although possible, not easy to develop relationships with non domesticated animals. There's also some people out there, of course, who have exotic pets that most people don't have. I mean, dogs, cats, fish, uh, guinea pigs, hamsters, rabbits, I'd say those are typical pets. There's other pets are ones that I would call exotic. I mean, if we're talking about like a snake, for example, most people don't have a snake as a pet. There's of course some people out there who have had snakes for pets, but that's not very common at all. And yeah, that is true. It's true that having exotic pets can definitely backfire, which is exactly what which is exactly why most people don't have exotic pets. The funny thing is, I've known people over the years that have had dogs. In fact, for years I wanted to have a dog, but then me and my parents ended up getting cats instead. We love our cats, of course, but for a long time I didn't actually want a cat at all. There were friends that I knew back in New York who had dogs. I knew people who actually lived on a farm. They have a lot of different farm animals like goats, chicken, horses, cows at one point, and they live mostly off the land to the point where they'll milk cows for milk and get meat through hunting and fishing. I've done fishing before, and Dad, you and me have done that several times before. I've done it a good amount of times before, but I've never hunted before. Yeah, I've shot a gun before, though not very often, but I haven't hunted specifically. I have, though, shot other things before. I mean, like, I've used a slingshot before. Uh, also, let's see, I've mentioned all the other ones. Yeah, I used to have Nerf guns, and I have done archery before. I did that when I went on a missions trip to Texas. I went there with crew from SMSU. We did several different things for these two different mission trips. I mean, for one of them, we went to a zoo. For another one, we did an escape room, which I had not done before, but I thought it was pretty interesting. The idea is that you go into a room, you're role playing because there's a story that's being told. You're trying to solve this puzzle in order to escape the room. How interactive it is depends on what exact escape room you go to. Uh, see you later, Dad. Thanks for hopping on today. It was fun. It was fun. So in that case, In that case, I'm going to sign off as well. So see you. This is Parma Mary Dog or Sean Mary signing off for the day. Sayonara, YouTube.